What was your initial reaction when you heard about this bullet train project?
Well, back in basically 2008, so I was a no from the get-go onto the train, just simply from the fact that it doesn't solve any of the congestion problems, and basically it was strapped full of lies. I mean, if you just look at bullet trains, inherently they are a money loss. They don't make money. They're not self-sustaining. From what I remember, there's only 2 lines in the entire world that are profitable for lines, and that's in France. But then they added a bunch of other things, another lines, because all politicians wanted to add their lines. And, basically a lot of bureaucracy got in the way, and it's a money loss. So to me, I don't understand why you would be using, basically into the sense, 1960s, 1970s technology to build something that costs billions of dollars that doesn't alleviate traffic. So the promises that were made were garbage.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree. I think it's old technology. They're not as safe as planes. By far, they're not as safe as planes. And I don't think they're as cost-effective as...
No, there isn't, because you don't have... If it was cost-effective, then you would have really private companies building high-speed rails without government subsidies and being dependent upon them to survive. Airlines don't need... government subsidies. People take them, and then especially with newer technologies going to be coming out with faster planes, quieter, like near supersonic like planes, it doesn't make sense to build this. Now, if you're going to build transportation, I'm all for it, transportation solutions, but you got to actually address issues that help with traffic congestion, and a high-speed rail does not do that one. It's just basically a project for, unions and construction companies and, government consultants to make money. No one's going to take this thing. It's garbage from day one.
I was recently reading about China and everything that they've done with their high-speed rail, and it's just been incredibly inexpensive. But then again, it's being run by the federal government, very low labor costs, very low land costs, like zero probably. So every circumstance is different. In California, you've got the most expensive real estate in the world.
Well, yes, and part of the stuff is, they were supposed to start basically into the Central Valley, where it was going to be cheaper and it's going to have less requirements from, seismic activities, because this is California, so we have to worry about earthquakes and everything else. But you've seen the land explosion. They came up with an idea. It's typical government, kind of into the senses where they wanted to do a project. They didn't count the cost, basically, of what it was going to take to build the high-speed rail. Didn't do proper land acquisition. And the problem is, it's instead of looking at this project and saying, how can we build, even if you were going to build a high-speed rail, this is how it should work, just like it does in the private sector. What will work? What is the best route to do? And let's go ahead and do that one. But it doesn't matter, because government severely wants to waste money, right? You have a politician in Fresno or somewhere else who wants a high-speed rail. They want the line coming into their area, even though it serves no purpose, but it's going to go ahead and give jobs locally. So they go ahead and build it out, right? It's a coalition of garbage that gets put into it. And that's why you get something that balloons. I mean, originally we were looking at this project being $33 billion. And then when the new estimate from the high-speed rail from there said, it would be about $77 billion, but it could cost up to almost $100 billion. It was about $98.1 billion. And it's going to exceed that, too, if it continues to basically go on. There is no way. They have no ways to get through the grapevine. They're going to have to bore. I mean, this thing is going to be way north of $100 billion.
Yeah, I think that at this point, based on this interviews we've done so far, I would imagine our listeners probably aren't going to need to be convinced that this thing is kind of way off the rails and a disaster. I think the two things I'm kind of interested in is how did we get here? Where did this thing make a big left turn, and then how do we stop this thing? So going back to the beginning, as far as the initial referendum on this, who was putting money in this thing to support this initiative? Do you know who the money was?
From what I know, back in 2008 when it was Prop 1A, it was a coalition of obviously unions and contractors, and what eventually became like the president of the High Speed Rail Authority, which is interesting in the fact I can't remember his name.
Quentin Kopp.
But he's actually, he's suing
Yes.
the High Speed Rail.
We've interviewed Quentin Kopp, and he's still a huge advocate of a train. He's just upset with how this is being managed and the fact that it's no longer going to be high-speed rail.
High speed. Yeah, I mean, and that was a requirement. If you're not familiar, I ended up running for California State Controller back in 2018, and one of the functions of the controller is being able to hold funding from the train if it doesn't comply with state law. So, the current controller was reelected, Betty Yee. She was like, oh, well, yeah, you can, but, I'm not allowed to do a performance audit. And it's like, you don't need to do a performance audit on this thing. The documentation is saying exactly what you already need to know from the high-speed rail. A third of this is not being funded by the private sector. A third is not being funded by the federal government. We're paying for it 100%. Violation of Prop 1A. It's supposed to have time restrictions and actually be high speed. Well, it isn't high speed rail. And then also the other requirement was there would go no ongoing subsidies, and we're already looking at $100 billion. From that one, I would still encourage the controller, Betty Yee, to go ahead and stop funding on this immediately. You don't need to do a performance audit. All you need to do is take their own documentation and go ahead and cancel the project. Unfortunately, she's not going to do it, and that's why us at Reform California, we're going to be putting a ballot initiative in 2020 to repeal the high-speed rail and defund this once and for all. We're going to bring it back to the voters.
So she's not defunding it because she says, I don't have the authority to not defund it.
Well, she never said she didn't have, because she never stated when we would be debating or we had radio interviews, radio debates and everything else that I wanted to defund it. She never said that I couldn't, because that is the job of the controller, is to hold funding if something doesn't comply with state law. It's in a basic audit. Now, her thing was, I'm not allowed to do a performance audit on the high-speed rail, which I will agree. She couldn't do a performance audit on the high-speed rail. But it doesn't need to, because their own documentation coming from the High-Speed Rail Authority is proving that they're not compliant with the law. So you just have to take their statements, put it out an issue, and say, until this project complies with Prop 1A and what the law says and what the voters approved, I'm going to be holding funding until, and allow the High-Speed Rail Authority then to come back, issue payments, and did we lose connection?
No, I still got you. Oh, now you paused. It was going fine, and all of a sudden it froze.
Cancel.
Okay, hold on. Yeah, I think you're back.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So in your view, is she simply just towing the party line? Bottom line, everything these days comes down to politics. You're either for it or against it based on your party. Democrats are in favor of this. So is that why she's not doing anything to try to stop this project?
Well, I truthfully think the Democrats actually want this project dead. I think even Gavin Newsom wants this project dead. They know it's a boondoggle, but they can't. I don't think they can. So I think it is basically towing the party line. No one's going to use this train. We already know it. It's going to cost billions of dollars, and they would like to obviously focus on spending billions of dollars on other projects that we don't agree with, which would be, some of the social programs and welfare state that they want to create in California, and they'd rather spend the money there than on a high-speed rail that will never really be built and not be high-speed, and no one will take it, and drain the state of billions of dollars.
So hold on. If you're saying that you believe that even Democrats oppose this project, why aren't they taking the steps then to stop it? Because it is 100% within their control to do so.
Because it's politics, right? Because there's enough funders and donors, I think, from on the Democratic side or on the unions that are making, there's a lot of people working on this thing, and it's a project. So they're not happy with it, but I don't think there's political will for them to get rid of it.
Well, Newsom at some point, am I correct? He has not really made a statement about the train since he was inaugurated earlier this month.
Yeah, from what I know, and then he's talked about maybe having it from Fresno to San Francisco or blah blah blah, and then canceling the portion, basically coming to Southern California, because obviously that would be even a more disaster and very expensive to actually do. So I think for the most part, even from our polling data that we did with Reform California, 2/3 about of Californians, depends. I've seen also about 57%, but I've seen up to higher, that want to get rid of this train. I think it's a bipartisan thing. It was well intentioned. We kind of wished that what we promised was going to actually work, but it's not. So,
by the way, that was a question I was going to ask. When you say it was well intentioned, I mean, do you feel that the original initiative was in good faith? There was they truly felt this thing could be built for those dollars, and there was proper due diligence done?
Well, no, I don't think there was proper due diligence. I mean, I just think it's they blindsided with how sexy a high-speed rail sounds and everything else, and they wanted to build it, so they negate the fact to basically do due diligence in it. And a lot of times, there's no political. They're not stewards of the taxpayers' money. It's not like a corporation where you own stock into it and you're getting paid money. If you waste money and you do something stupid, it's not your money anyways.
So really, wouldn't you say the biggest mistake then that was made was actually commencing construction of this thing and commencing the spending of billions of dollars, which started, a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I mean, to me is, look, if you went ahead and put it on a prop, I'm fine to look at a lot of different stuff. I know they've talked about, doing a, state-run bank, which I don't disagree with, obviously, with the cannabis and so forth. But if you wanted to conduct a study and properly take a look and say, what's the, constitutional arguments, pro, against it, what kind of issues we'll get with federal regulation, and do a study on something, I'm fine with that. And if the voters want to. But before you break ground, buy the land, know exactly where the line's going to be going, have true estimates, and, cost overruns, you have to have legitimate ones. All government, basically, big projects have always gone over budget by huge amounts, typically. So at least trying to account for that and then say, this is what it's going to be really looking at. Here's the problems that we have. This is the kind of land we're going to have to acquire. Do we move forward onto it? Where basically they just really want to break ground and build so much where at the end, government would basically go to the voters, well, we've gone this far, let's just complete it anyways.
And how far have they gone so far as dollars spent? Do you know how many billions have been spent?
Not the exact amount. I think it's around 10, somewhere within there, I believe. But I can't remember the exact number.
Yeah, I've had trouble getting that number, which is kind of sad in and of itself. But yeah, I'm hearing estimates as high as $10 billion already spent. Does that already make it the biggest white elephant in the history of the United States of America?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much, because you haven't built anything. I mean,
Donald Trump is the federal government. The federal government is shut down over a debate over $5 billion, and the state of California has already spent almost $10 billion building tracks in the middle of nowhere. Yeah,
and it makes no sense. And a lot of the things that they've built doesn't meet code for the seismic, so they have to be torn down and rebuilt again. And then the problem is that they say, well, the delay, those are going to be paid from the contractors. No, it won't. It'll be paid by the taxpayers. And this is what happens. The longer a project goes, the inflation, they're going to charge the state more money anyways. So that's where you get the inflation from their own study that it could cost up to $100 billion.
So Gavin Newsom, I think, wants to run for president one day. This project is going to be a major blemish on his record if he doesn't do something relatively soon, it seems to me.
Oh, I don't think this is going to be his biggest problem. On election night, speaking, casually with Cal Matters, I told him if I was Gavin Newsom's consultant, I would probably recommend he run for president this time in 2020, not wait until 2024 because the pension crisis that's looming, which, we're probably looking at a recession somewhere around the summer of 2020 as most people expect.
A recession because?
Well, I mean, it's just in a natural course of economics. I mean, the tax breaks and so forth, they always will have a boost into the economy, but they eventually will kind of run their course. They're not permanent in other things. There's going to be changes. You expect to have, a downturn. Could it be a recession or simply downturn? But the market will not continue.
So your point is, whenever we do have that downturn, which is inevitable, whether it's 2020 or later,
yes.
When we do have that downturn, what's going to happen to California?
Oh, massive pension crisis. Right now, with the discount rate of return that we basically are saying, we're migrating it from 7.5 to 7%. CalPERS, for instance, our outside consultants say the rate of return on our investments on long term, at least over the next 10 years, should be 6.2%. Stanford did an analysis and said it should be 5.5%. So if we took Stanford's number...
And so people know CalPERS is
the California pension system, basically, which it has most government employees into it, plus the Cal State university employees. Then there is CalSTRS, which is administrators in schools primarily. And then there's a UC Regents. Those are the three big ones that have. Now, there's also independent ones like LA and like LAUSD are independent on their own and don't have their own. But within California, those are the three major pensions.
So California really is a boom and bust state when it comes to the funding of the state government, because our taxes are so high that when the economy's doing well, the state government rakes in the money,
Yes.
and then when things turn, suddenly there's a significant drop in those dollars.
Well, yeah, because California primarily has their capital gains tax is where they get, because we have high income tax and it's based on income tax. And really 1% of the population, the 1%ers, is basically who fund California. From what I remember the statistics, about 15,000 families, like individuals, families, taxpayers, fund about 25% of the general fund. About 70,000 fund about 48%. So that's why you'll see a huge increase in, the surplus, as we say. We'll get that one, and then it will dramatically cut down and drop simply for the fact that, we're based so much on the stock market and those capital gains. And so that's why they want to add the service and labor tax. That's what Gavin Newsom is going to be looking at doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of the just general observations I have about California. It's just incredible that, you got Silicon Valley, you've got Los Angeles, you've got San Francisco, you've got billionaires galore in California. You have probably the most expensive real estate in the world that has property taxes associated with it. You have sales tax that's almost 10%. I mean, the money that California must bring in taxes, and yet we have such basic problems like homelessness, which is a frickin' mess, roads that are an embarrassment. I mean, you just go over to Arizona and you drive around Phoenix and Scottsdale, gorgeous roads.
Mm-hmm.
California, with all the money that we have, we can't even have basic roads, and instead we're going to spend it on a bullet train.
Well, I mean, it's just like it's a trust fund kid, right? California's a trust fund kid. Doesn't matter how much money you have. They never learned fiscal discipline and how to be good steward of people's money. And you can have somebody who doesn't make as much money, but, will have a home paid off, have a car. It's because they've been good stewards of their money. California, they just waste money. It's the poster child of, government incompetence and corruption.